When Dana Whitaker sent her twin daughters to ride their bike that summer afternoon in 1992, she had no reason to believe it would be the last time she saw them. Lacey and Rowan were just 7 years old, dressed in their favorite matching t-shirts, sunflowers and flamingos, and pedaled down the sidewalk like they had dozens of times before. The neighborhood was quiet, safe. Nothing felt out of place. But then the sun set, and they hadn't come home. The small Missouri town of Auburn was thrown into panic. Police combed every ditch, creek, and back road. Helicopters circled for days. But the trail stopped cold. No witnesses. No screams. Not even the bike. By the second week, the search shifted from rescue to recovery. Dana clung to hope long after most had let go. And then, 13 years later, during a completely unrelated FBI investigation, a discovery inside a narrow cave system would upend every assumption about what really happened that day and reveal the one detail investigators had missed all along. Dana never liked the heat that summer brought to Auburn, the way the humidity stuck to skin and slowed time. But the girls loved it. Barefoot mornings in the yard, popsicles melting into the grass, their laughter echoing from driveway to driveway. Lacey had the louder voice, always challenging Rowan to race to the end of the block. Rowan followed without question. On the morning of July 6, 1992, they asked to go out riding after lunch. Dana helped them buckle their helmets, kissed them both on the forehead, and watched them pedal off down Fair Hollow Drive on their shared purple bicycle, Lacey in front, Rowan clutching the seat behind. It was a routine as ordinary as any, until 5:30 p.m. when the porch light flicked on and neither of them came home. By nightfall, Dana had called every neighbor on the street. By midnight, police were canvassing the surrounding woods. Search dogs were brought in. Rivers were dragged. Volunteers scoured drainage ditches and nearby parks. Not even a shoelace turned up. Dana became a shell in the years that followed. She kept their room untouched, bedspreads still tucked, dolls lined up against the window. Each birthday passed with 2 cupcakes, 2 candles, and silence. Most people stopped asking after the 5th year. By the 7th, the local news no longer covered the anniversaries. The world forgot. But Dana never moved away. She couldn't. Then, in 2005, the case cracked open without warning. An FBI team was in Missouri working a separate investigation, an active case involving a man suspected of trafficking and multiple abductions along rural routes. He was known to use remote locations as temporary holding spaces, and one tip led them to a tight limestone cave outside Wilton's Quarry, about 60 miles south of Auburn. The team wasn't expecting anything connected to old cases. But inside the cave, wedged between crumbling rock and shallow earth, was a rusted purple children's bicycle. One pedal was missing. The handlebars were bent sideways. Draped over the seat was a yellowed shirt, the words, "You pretty flamingo," just barely legible through layers of mineral dust. Next to it, another shirt, blue, soaked and stained, but unmistakably printed with sunflowers. The agents froze. Someone whispered, "This isn't the case we're working." A crime scene unit was dispatched immediately. Photos were taken. Measurements logged. When the images reached the cold case division in Jefferson City, a name surfaced within minutes. Whitaker twins. Missing 1992. 7 years old. Never found. When Dana was brought in to identify the photos, she recognized the shirts instantly. Her knees buckled. The FBI couldn't explain how the evidence had ended up in that specific cave, let alone why it took 13 years to surface during an unrelated investigation. But there was no denying the implications. It reopened everything. The cave wasn't wide. Less than 3 feet high in most places, with narrow veins that could only be crawled through. What else lay further inside hadn't yet been mapped. No human remains were found that day. No bones. No hair. No trace of the girls themselves. Just the bike, the clothes, and, deeper in, drag marks in the soil. Someone had been there, possibly recently. For Dana, it was both agony and hope. She'd grieved them once. Now she didn't know what to feel. The new investigation began quietly. No press. No leaks. The FBI knew this could be something far bigger than just a cold case resolution. As they prepared to re-enter the cave with advanced equipment and subterranean scanners, one agent made a quiet note in his logbook. Either someone left them here in '92 and forgot, or someone's been keeping this place a secret for a very long time. The official search resumed quietly. There were no press releases, no headlines, only a handful of agents, forensic specialists, and a cave biologist from the Missouri Geological Survey. The site was remote, 30 minutes off the nearest paved road, then a narrow footpath through scrub, limestone outcrops, and shallow, dry streambeds. Locals called it Hunter's Mouth, a shallow cave system rarely explored and never mapped in full. The purple bicycle was photographed, tagged, and lifted from the floor with careful hands. Both tires were deflated, the frame rusted, and the seat chewed at the edges, likely from small cave rodents or insects. But the details were unmistakable. A faded sticker on the rear fender still clung to the metal, property of Rowan W. Dana confirmed it when they showed her. She wept, but didn't speak. The trauma had reopened something deep, both familiar and unbearable. By midweek, the team brought in LiDAR equipment and narrow core drills to begin mapping the interior passages. What they found beyond the initial chamber chilled them. Roughly 17 feet beyond where the bike was discovered, a secondary tunnel curved to the right, barely 3 feet wide and 2 feet high. It hadn't been visible at first. Brush, dust, and decades of sediment had sealed it naturally. When they broke through, the air inside was cooler, older. Staler. The light from the handheld rigs caught on something metallic just inside the new passage. A second object, small, square, rusted, an old padlock, snapped open. Nearby, something else. A glass soda bottle from the early '90s, partially buried. Then, a crumpled plastic bag containing a girl's sock. Pink, trim, faded stars. Still elastic. None of these items had any business being here. There were no known sinkholes in the area, no stories of children playing near the quarry in 1992. No neighbors had reported hearing anything unusual that day, no screams, no screeching tires. And most disturbing of all, the girls had never taken that route on their bikes. They weren't allowed to. It was too far from home. Dana had always said that. So how did their bike and their clothing end up in a cave miles away? One theory emerged, quietly, among the team. Someone had taken them there. The FBI expanded the scope of the investigation. Records from 1992 were pulled. Arrests, missing persons, registered vehicles, property owners. Anything suspicious within a 50-mile radius of the cave. One name came up, not in 1992, but in 1993. Walter Cry, a seasonal maintenance contractor who had worked briefly for the nearby quarry before quitting abruptly. He'd been arrested in '93 for trespassing on federal land and again in '96 for possession of stolen property. Never connected to any violent crime. But what made him stand out was a 1994 tip in an unrelated child endangerment case, a file that had been closed due to lack of evidence. In that report, a neighbor mentioned seeing Cry leading 2 little girls into the woods near Route 8 one summer evening. When asked how she remembered the number of girls so clearly, the woman had said, "Because they were dressed like twins." The detail hadn't meant anything at the time. But now it landed like a gunshot. The FBI secured a warrant and visited Cray's last known address, a crumbling trailer on leased land about an hour from the cave site. He hadn't lived there in over a decade. But the place hadn't been touched. Overgrown weeds. Rotting porch steps. Inside, water damage, mold, old newspapers stacked in corners. In the kitchen, agents found something else. A box of Polaroids, yellowed with age. Most were mundane. Creek beds, rusted vehicles, abandoned cabins. But 2 of the photos showed a cave. The exact limestone formations matched those from the cave where the bike had been discovered. In the lower right corner of one image, a shoe. Small, child-sized, blue. It still wasn't proof. Nothing tied Craig directly to the disappearance. But it was enough. Back in Auburn, whispers began to resurface. Dana stayed quiet, refusing all interviews. But neighbors recalled the way she used to wander the neighborhood in the years after 1992, carrying flyers, asking cashiers and strangers if they'd seen two girls matching shirts on one bike. Most just nodded and stepped aside. Now the town wondered if she hadn't been grieving daughters who were gone, but searching for ones who might still be alive. The cave search expanded again, this time with oxygen meters and ground-penetrating radar. By day 10, agents discovered a third chamber, deeper and far narrower. At the center of it, barely large enough to crawl through, was a section of compacted earth with distinct impressions. Two sets of shallow bedding, indentations in the stone, consistent with shackles or rope marks, and etched faintly into the back wall of the rock. Letters, scratched by hand, almost unreadable. One agent used a brush and chalk to raise the impression. R&L, Rowan and Lacey. There was no denying it now. Something had happened in that cave. Something prolonged. Something planned. And whoever had brought them there, whether in 1992 or later, had stayed long enough to make the space livable. What haunted the team most wasn't what was found. It was what still hadn't been. There were no remains. No blood, no exit prints, no trail. It was as though the girls had simply disappeared again, vanished a second time, this time from the one place they were supposed to be found. The deeper the cave yielded, the more it began to feel like it wasn't a crime scene. It was a message, not just to the agents or to Dana, but to anyone who had long stopped believing. Inside the narrow chamber, where R&L had been scratched into the stone, the air held a silence that made men whisper even when alone. Equipment echoed. Chalk dust hung in place. It wasn't just claustrophobia. It was reverence. As if something unspeakable had happened there, and the cave itself had chosen to remember what no one else could. The impressions in the dirt, those twin depressions, were later confirmed to match the dimensions of small bedding pads. But there were other signs too. Milk crate. Rusted, but clearly used as a seat. And embedded in a shallow crevice near the wall, they found an old cassette tape. Water-damaged, bloated with mineral rot, barely held together. Back at Quantico's digital forensics lab, they carefully transferred the tape's ribbon to clean reels and ran it through restoration software. It took days to reconstruct, most of it static, hiss or ambient sound. But in one 16-second clip, the agents heard a girl's voice, faint, tired. "Okay, we did it. You say it next." Then another voice, slightly different pitch. "Don't wanna." "They'll hear. Please, just say it, so we remember." A moment of silence. Then, whispered, "Rowan and Lacey. We're still here." The audio clipped out. The lab went silent, and the agents who had worked long hours in the cold tunnels, many of them wept. Word didn't spread fast. Not officially. The FBI withheld the audio, classified the file, and refused to label the site as a confirmed abduction. Ongoing investigation, they told reporters. But Auburn heard anyway. It always does. The town didn't know how to hold it. For 13 years, the twins had been spoken of only in past tense. Dana's house had remained untouched, their bedroom sealed, shoes still lined up beneath the dresser. Now, neighbors stopped mid-sentence when their names came up. One morning, a boy who'd gone to 3rd grade with them in 1992 left flowers at the trailhead near the cave. A note attached. "I remember your laugh." But memory wasn't the same as truth. And truth was getting harder to hold. Because the discovery raised new questions, questions that disturbed even the most seasoned agents. If the girls had been alive long enough to leave behind etchings and a recording, then why had no one ever heard them? Why had no one seen a vehicle? And most haunting of all, who had been with them? The cave had no signs of forced entry, no signs of recent fire, food, or clothing beyond the bike and shirts. There was no rope, no chain, no DNA, just the evidence that someone had created a hidden space, and that someone else had used it. Agent Ramirez, who had been with the Bureau for over 19 years, privately voiced what others were too afraid to. What if this wasn't a kidnapping in the usual sense? What if it was containment? His supervisor stared at him. Containment? What if someone didn't take them to harm them? What if they were hiding them? 1992 had been an election year. There were more missing children cases in the U.S. that year than the previous 3 combined, but most were resolved within 72 hours. Rowan and Lacey were not. FBI analysts reopened an old theory, one long dismissed in the early days of the investigation. A regional trafficking circuit operating through private backroads and seasonal construction crews across Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. It had never been proven. But at least 2 cases from 1991 and 1993 shared eerie parallels. Twin siblings. Disappearances during daylight. Single bicycle. No witnesses. Both sets of children had never been found. There was one strange connection. A man named Greg Tanner. He wasn't in the system, but in 1995, a construction inspector had filed an anonymous report alleging that Tanner was living off-grid with 2 children he claimed were his nieces, who never appeared in town, never enrolled in school, and spoke in hushed voices when addressed. When the sheriff visited the property, no children were found. Tanner claimed they had gone back to family. No charges were filed. The file was buried. But now, 10 years later, it resurfaced. Agents tracked Tanner's last known address to a burned-out trailer near the Osage River. No electricity, but inside, on the back of a kitchen cabinet, a single photo had been taped face down. It showed 2 girls. No names, no date, but one wore a sunflower shirt, and the other, a yellow tee with a pink flamingo. They were older, maybe 13 or 14, but the resemblance was uncanny. It was them, Rowan and Lacey, still together, still dressed in the same shirts, or replicas of them, and still missing. But this photo changed everything. It meant that in 1995, 3 full years after they vanished, they had still been alive. The photograph, sun-bleached and curling at the corners, shifted the case from tragedy to revelation. There was no longer room for hopeful speculation or the quiet denial of old theories. Rowan and Lacey had not vanished in 1992. They had been taken, moved, and hidden. And someone, at least one person, had kept them alive long enough to capture them on camera again years later. The question was no longer what happened. It was how long it had been happening. And why? The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was brought in to reconstruct what little timeline they could. They worked backward from the cave. Evidence there suggested the girls had been present at least until mid-1995, possibly longer. Moisture data from the sediment where the bedding impressions were found indicated movement, rolling, repositioning across multiple seasons. Not just a brief stay, possibly years. The milk crate seat, the soda bottle, the scratched initials, none of it was haphazard. Someone had provided for them. Someone had returned. The behavioral team laid out 2 major theories. Voluntary protector model. Someone who believed they were rescuing or hiding the girls from a perceived threat, real or imagined. Controlled captivity model. Someone who staged the cave environment as a false refuge while maintaining total control over their access to the outside world. The second theory terrified Dana most. Back in Auburn, Dana's life became unrecognizable. Reporters returned. Police cars parked on her street again. Neighbors she hadn't spoken to in a decade dropped by with casseroles and questions. But Dana stayed silent. Even now, even with the shirts, the bike, the photo, there was a part of her that still didn't believe the girls were gone. Not truly. She started walking again, past the old playground, down the streets where they used to ride. She didn't expect to find them. She just needed the motion. One morning, she stopped by an antique shop she hadn't entered in years. She didn't tell anyone why. But when the clerk rang up her order, a 1990s cassette player and a set of children's hair ties, she simply said, "I think they were trying to leave messages." In late August, agents discovered something else. A second cave, roughly 7 miles from the original, across the ridge, behind an overgrown deer trail. It had been partially collapsed by erosion. The entrance was narrow, almost vertical, with broken limestone steps leading downward. Inside, the air was thick, old, and silent. They expected nothing. Maybe an animal den. Maybe trash. Instead, they found fragments. A child's toothbrush, a box of crayons fused by time, and 2 names again, etched into the back of the rock. Lacey, Rowan, this time written out fully, and underneath them, in different handwriting, sharper, more chaotic, a single line. "Don't tell him we know." It wasn't clear who had written it, but it changed the tone entirely. No longer just girls trapped in hiding. There was secrecy, resistance. Someone had been manipulating them, and at least one of them had known it. The FBI sent divers into the small spring-fed pond nearby, less than 50 feet from the cave's edge. They found nothing unusual at first. But 3 days into the sweep, sonar detected an anomaly. A wooden box, submerged in the deep shelf, sealed tight with wire. Inside, photographs. Most were destroyed, but a few had preserved. One showed a man, dark hair, beard, wearing a camo jacket, standing beside the girls near a rusted van. The girls weren't smiling. They looked older, maybe 14, maybe 15. One leaned into the other, eyes wary, arms close, and written across the back of the photo, June 1999. We stayed quiet. This was the last known sighting. They were 7 when they disappeared. This photo suggested they'd been alive for at least 7 more years, possibly longer. And again, no bodies, no graves, no known location after that. Just that note. We stayed quiet. The investigation recentered on Greg Tanner. His identity began to unravel. Tanner wasn't his real name. It was an alias used after a short prison term in 1987. His real name was Malcolm Reese, born in Kansas, moved through a dozen counties under different names, always tied to seasonal work. His record was sealed in several states. He'd been charged twice with interference with a minor, though both cases were dropped. He died in 2004, 1 year before the bicycle was discovered in the cave. His body had been found in a burned-down barn outside Jefferson City. Cause of death listed as smoke inhalation. No foul play suspected. Until now. Investigators believe he may have died trying to destroy evidence. But what that evidence was, and where it might have gone, remains unknown. Dana received an envelope by mail in September 2005. No return address. No postmark. Inside, one item, a beaded bracelet, handmade, the kind sold at fairs or elementary schools. The beads were arranged in alternating colors, LRDMB1 to 99-2. She hadn't seen it in over a decade. She had helped Lacey make it the day before they disappeared. It had vanished with them, and now it was back, still warm from the envelope, still real, still hers. The bracelet shattered something, not just in Dana, but in the case itself. It was no longer just a trail of objects or fragments of sound. This was an active signal, a deliberate act. Someone had gone to the trouble of preserving it, mailing it, getting it into her hands. 13 years later, quietly, without warning, FBI analysts examined the envelope. There were no fingerprints, no traceable DNA. The stamp was common, the paper generic. The only thing unique was the bracelet itself, hand-threaded beads strung in the same pattern Dana had once shown her daughters at the kitchen table. No one knew what DM Beat stood for. It wasn't any known nickname. And the numbers, 1992, weren't a mystery. But the very presence of it reopened a theory that agents had tried to set aside. What if one of the girls was still alive? The investigation shifted again. Cold case units across 3 states, Missouri, Arkansas, and Kansas, were briefed and re-engaged. Patterns were compared. Disappearances near national forests, unregistered vehicles reported near schools, men found dead under strange circumstances. One case from 2002 in Kansas caught attention. A hiker found a journal inside a weather-worn duffel bag, abandoned in a stone culvert near Fort Scott. The writing inside was erratic, disjointed, but the name Lacey appeared twice. The hiker turned it over to local police at the time, who dismissed it as fictional. It was never logged into evidence. The bag was discarded. The journal eventually went missing. Now, 13 years after the twins vanished, that oversight felt more than accidental. It felt like another link, one of many that hadn't been seen for what it was. A new map began forming, not of geography, but of intention. The caves, the photo, the audio, the envelope, the bracelet. These weren't just breadcrumbs. They were a trail someone had chosen to leave, someone who'd lived long enough to see themselves vanish from the public memory and who wanted, finally, to be seen. A single working theory took shape. Lacey had survived. Whether Rowan had or not remained uncertain. But the cave inscriptions had changed tone midway through. One was clearly stronger, more direct. And when the names were etched in full, the lines were uneven, as if only one hand had written both. Analysts compared the scrawl. They determined with 78% confidence that Lacey had written both names. If she was leaving messages, maybe she still was. Dana began receiving phone calls. The first was nothing, just static. The second, a voicemail with background wind. No words. The third, on a Tuesday night, lasted exactly 22 seconds. Enough to make out breathing, close to the mic, uneven, as if someone were trying to speak, but couldn't. Dana didn't tell the agents for 3 days. When she finally played them the audio, Agent Ramirez froze. He isolated one frequency, cleaned the background, slowed it. At second 12, something emerged. Not a word, but a hum. Faint, familiar. It was a song Dana had sung to the girls when they were small. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The breath clipped out. The line disconnected. It couldn't be coincidence. A specialist from the FBI's Behavioral Recovery Team drafted a report proposing a live memory radius analysis, a process that studies the behavior of long-missing persons who might resurface after years in isolation, abuse, or trauma. These people often return in fragmented ways, leaving objects, mimicking patterns, using indirect contact. The report concluded, subject may be attempting reconnection with origin point, but unclear whether for closure, assistance, or warning. Behavior consistent with trauma-induced memory loop. Risk of surveillance or external threat remains high. Translation: whoever was contacting Dana might be hiding, or being hunted, or both. Then came the break. In a small town outside Cape Girardeau, a librarian was clearing out the lost and found drawer when she came across a small, cloth-bound book. No title. Inside, torn pages, most blank, but one page in the center contained something strange. A hand-drawn map. Trees, a stream, a cave. Then 3 arrows pointing down to what looked like an underground chamber. Next to it, a line that read, "If you're reading this, follow light." Below, not above. The librarian turned it over to a local officer who alerted the bureau due to the cave-like illustration and vague similarity to the Auburn site. It took days, but the sketches matched an unmapped sinkhole 2 miles northeast of the original cave system. A team was dispatched. They found the hole, and they went in. What they discovered inside wasn't a person, but it wasn't empty either. There were 2 small child-sized mattresses, a broken plastic lantern, empty cans of preserved food, faded graffiti on the walls, and in the far corner, nearly buried in rock, a showbox wrapped in layers of plastic and cloth. Inside, a photo of the twins, age 7, a half-burned drawing of a girl on a bicycle, and a single piece of paper with the words, "I kept us safe until I couldn't." The handwriting matched the cave scratchings. The FBI didn't release this publicly, but Dana was allowed to read the note. She said nothing for a long time, then whispered, "That's Lacey's R." She meant the curve of the letter, the way it dipped, always a little low. Whatever had happened in those caves, however dark, however long, one thing was now painfully clear. Someone had carried the weight. Someone had survived. And they had left enough behind to be found. But whether that trail led forward or back was the question no one could yet answer. By October, the case had entered a strange rhythm, part investigation, part vigil. Each clue no longer answered a question, but introduced a new one, a deeper kind. The showbox, the note, the voicemail, they weren't evidence of a crime in the legal sense. They were the emotional residue of something unresolved. What had happened was no longer just a disappearance. It was a kind of erasure, done slowly, across years, in silence. And for Dana, silence had become unbearable. She did something the FBI advised against. She mailed a letter. It wasn't addressed to a person, just an open message, published through a local newspaper in 3 regional counties. A few sentences. Simple. Direct. To the one who's leaving pieces behind, I see them. If you're still trying to be found, I'm still here. Come home. It ran in the classifieds under Lost and Found. Dana didn't know what she expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe just the act of writing was enough. But 5 days later, something arrived at the Auburn Library's Dropbox. A spiral-bound notebook. Water-stained. Pages warped and smudged. No signature. But inside were small sketches, dozens of them. A swing set. A bike. A row of daisies. 2 girls in matching shirts, one always drawn with longer hair. And on the last page, "We didn't know how to leave. He said the world forgot." I think he lied. FBI handwriting analysts confirmed. The author was likely the same person who had written the note in the showbox. But here, for the first time, was something else, an emotion that hadn't been present before. Anger. Until now, everything left behind had been quiet, mournful, apologetic. This wasn't. The line, "He said the world forgot." I think he lied, held weight. It was accusation, maybe regret. And it pointed to a critical turning point. Whoever he was, he had kept them hidden by convincing them the world no longer wanted them, that no one was looking, that their mother had stopped trying. It was manipulation of the cruelest kind, weaponizing loneliness. The Behavioral Analysis Unit reworked their profile. If Malcolm Reese, a.k.a. Greg Tanner, was their man, his methods were now clearer. He had removed the girls, not to sell or harm them quickly, but to keep them. Controlled captivity over time. Grooming through silence. Conditioning them to believe the world was dangerous, indifferent, forgetful. And it might have worked. For years, it had worked. Until one of the girls, likely Lacey, had started remembering who they were. And worse, remembering that someone had once searched for them. That realization, analysts believed, had been the turning point. Not an escape, but a plan. They now believed the cave inscriptions, cassette message, and items were left not in panic, but on purpose as a trail. Slow unspooling of voice. Not to authorities, but to one person, their mother. The notebook held one more detail. A map, crude, hand-drawn. Not of the cave systems, but of a small lake. One not previously searched. Crater Pond. Less than 4 miles from the site of the first bike discovery. The pond was shallow in summer, but in autumn rains it filled high, its bottom muddy and unsteady. In the 1990s, it had been used by local anglers and hunters, but a landslide in 1996 made it difficult to reach, and it slowly disappeared from public use. Now, agents brought in ground-penetrating radar and a dive team. On the second day, they found something. A single object. Submerged in the muck, entangled in vines and roots. A small, blue backpack. still zipped, still intact. Inside, a library card laminated in plastic. Dana's name on the account. The borrower listed, Lacey. Due date, June 1992. It had been missing since the day they disappeared. Dana collapsed when they showed her. Not because she was shocked, but because she remembered something Lacey had said the night before the disappearance. If we get lost, I'll still bring the books back. There was no body in the pond. No bones. No clothing. Just the backpack. Just enough to remind everyone they were never that far away. They had stayed close. Maybe even tried to return. And maybe one of them still was. Because 2 nights after the backpack was found, a motion sensor camera placed by the shoreline recorded something. At 2:16 a.m. in the fog, a figure, small, hooded, barefoot. They walked to the edge of the pond, knelt by the water, and stayed there for nearly 7 minutes, still, quiet, not moving, just watching the surface. Then, just before the footage cut, they turned slightly toward the tree line, toward the camera, though clearly unaware. It was blurry, but for Dana, there was no doubt. It was her daughter. The sighting at Crater Pond rippled through the small team like a pulse, an echo of something they had almost forgotten to feel. Hope. But hope was fragile here. The camera image was grainy, distorted by fog and low light. The figure's face was indistinct under a hood. Yet, the posture, slightly hunched, hesitant, was achingly familiar. An instant that felt both miraculous and mournful. Dana watched the replay on a tiny monitor, huddled in a makeshift command post by the water's edge. Her breath caught in her throat as the silhouette shifted, as if listening for something she herself could not hear. When the figure turned, just enough for Dana to catch the curve of a ponytail swinging once in the mist, her knees buckled. She stumbled backward and wasn't there to see the agents exchange glances. They had been briefed to maintain professionalism, to treat this as just another lead. But in that moment, even the most seasoned detective felt it. The raw weight of an unanswered question, stretching out across 13 years. Behind them, the pond lay still, a sheet of glass under a clouded sky, unremarkable in every way except that it had just offered the ghosts of 2 little girls a chance to be seen again. That night, the FBI secured a nearby cabin for surveillance. Infrared cameras were installed along the shoreline. Motion sensors set among the reeds. A single agent, Corporal Diaz, was assigned to watch the live feed in shifts. Dana insisted on being there too. She sat in the corner of the cabin, wrapped in layers against the October chill, clutching the laminated library card. When Diaz offered her coffee, she nodded but didn't drink. The steam rose and blurred his face. "I'll call you if anything moves," Diaz said quietly. Dana nodded again, eyes fixed on the screens. She hadn't slept in days, and exhaustion scratched at her mind like itching wool. Yet she stayed vigilant. Hours passed. Shadows drifted. The infrared glow pulsed softly across screens that showed nothing but reeds and still water. Shortly after midnight, a buzz. Movement, Diaz whispered. Dana leaned forward. On the screen, a slender shape stepped out of the trees on the far side, silent and deliberate. The figure approached the water's edge, careful not to disturb the cattails. Dana's pulse hammered. She recognized the gait, the slight tilt at the hip, the cautious pace that reminded her of Lacey when she was learning to ride. Careful, deliberate, balancing. Diaz called it in. Within minutes, agents and waiters flanked the pond, moving as quietly as possible. Their boots sank into mud. Their breaths came in puffs. They fanned out in a semicircle, but the figure never turned. It knelt at the bank, hands dipped in the water, tracing circles. "Agent Diaz," Dana said softly. "That's Lacey." Diaz had been through missing child recoveries before. He only said, "Yes, ma'am," but his voice wavered. The team closed in. Each step brought the figure closer to the screen's center, more defined under the night vision glow. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind them, too close. The figure looked up, startled. For a moment, Dana thought she saw recognition in the way the shoulders slumped. Then the figure bolted, not toward the forest, but into the water, wading in thigh-deep without hesitation. The agents shouted, stepping forward, but the figure slipped beneath the surface and vanished into the dark depths. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Diaz turned to Dana. "The cameras. They're still rolling." We saw her get pulled under. Dana closed her eyes. She could almost hear Lacey's small voice now, echoing from the cave tape. "We're still here." In the days that followed, the pond search intensified. Dive teams, sonar, underwater cameras, all deployed. But the water yielded nothing. The figure had been there one moment and gone the next, as elusive as smoke. Agents began to question their assumptions. Was the pond even real? Or was it another layer of the girl's messages, an invitation rather than a hiding place? A place where they could appear on their own terms, then disappear again? Dana maintained her vigil. She returned each night, watching from the cabin. Between the fog and the reeds, she looked for the shape she'd seen. She whispered to the dark water, "Lacey, Rowan, I'm here." And sometimes she thought she heard a reply, a small splash, a ripple, as if someone far below was whispering back. Meanwhile, the forensic timeline unraveled further. Analysts re-examined the cassette from Part 3, the one with Rowan and Lacey's voices. Specialists discovered a second track buried beneath the static, a low-frequency echo, repeating a pattern every 17 seconds. The same pattern found on the pond motion sensor logs. A coded heartbeat, perhaps, or a call and response marker. The lead analyst, Dr. Chen, proposed a radical idea. The girls, or one of them, had implanted these signals as a cry for help, an invitation to their mother to follow their clues, step by step, deeper than any agent would dare. "They're leading us," Dr. Chen said. "One deliberate clue at a time." That realization transformed the operation. The FBI reoriented their resources from forceful search to patient tracking, monitoring every pattern, every timestamp, every minor anomaly. It was no longer a brute force recovery. It was a scavenger hunt crafted by two survivors who understood how to manipulate the rhythms of investigation. One morning, Dana awoke with a start. The cabin was quiet, the coffee growing cold. She rubbed her eyes and noticed something she hadn't before. A small envelope tucked under the door. Inside was a single Polaroid, color-fast, clear, of a secluded pull-off on an old highway overpass. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt. A guardrail. Beyond it, a steep drop to a river bend that mirrored the pond shape she'd studied. Written on the white border in messy block letters, "Meet me where roads breathe." No signature. But she recognized the line. It had been scratched into the cave wall beneath R&L in Part 2. It was Rowan's handwriting, more angular, less careful. Dana folded the photo and tucked it into her jacket. She didn't hesitate. She left the cabin before sunrise. And for the first time in 13 years, she followed a clue written directly for her. The overpass felt like a memory Dana hadn't made, but somehow knew. Cracked asphalt. A rust-stained guardrail. The wind pushing through trees in long, whispering waves. It didn't look like a place to meet someone. It looked like a place to be forgotten. She arrived just after dawn, wearing the same coat she'd worn to the last court hearing in 1993, the one where they'd declared the girls presumed deceased. It still held the shape of that moment. Still smelled faintly of her old perfume. The Polaroid sat in her pocket like a pulse. She stood by the edge of the guardrail and waited. Nothing. No figure emerged from the trees. No sound but birds and the occasional passing truck. But something told her this wasn't about waiting for someone to arrive. It was about seeing what had been left behind. She crossed the road and made her way down the embankment toward the river. The slope was steep, damp from overnight rain. Branches reached across the path like arms, snagging her coat. She pushed through, and there, under the overpass, just beyond a line of stones, she found it. A shoe. Small. Canvas. Faded pink with a torn tongue. the kind she used to tie every morning for Rowan before school. She dropped to her knees, hands trembling. Next to it, half buried in the mud, was a strip of fabric, blue cotton, part of a pajama sleeve. She recognized the pattern immediately. Stars and moons. Lacey's favorite pair. Dana turned slowly, scanning the surrounding brush. Behind her, tucked into a split in the concrete wall, she saw something else. A message, scrawled in black marker, the letters uneven but urgent. You weren't wrong. Just too late. It was signed with an R. The FBI arrived within the hour. They cordoned off the area, documented the items, dusted the wall for prints. But the message had been left in a place easy to find, meant to be found. Dr. Chen, reviewing the site, said quietly, "They're not hiding. They're directing." Another agent added, "That's not a goodbye. That's a breadcrumb." Back at the cabin, Dana studied the items again, one by one, laid out in a quiet room. Each object was deliberate. Each had weight, and each one was a kind of voice. She realized something she hadn't considered. This wasn't just Lacey's trail. It was Rowan's too. For so long, they'd believed only one girl had survived. The cassette had two voices, but the second, Rowan's, was quiet, hesitant, passive. Analysts assumed she'd died first. The narrative fit. But the handwriting on the overpass was hers. And it wasn't hesitant now. It was angry, determined, almost protective. What if Rowan had been the one who stayed behind? What if Lacey had escaped? The theory flipped. Suddenly, the entire trail took on a different meaning. Rowan hadn't been tagging along. She had been guarding something, or someone. The evidence led them back underground. The agents returned to the tight cave from Part 1, the one where the scratched names had first been found. This time, they explored the northern fork, a narrower crawlspace Dana had begged them not to risk before. But the latest clues made one thing clear. Whoever was leading them wanted them to go deeper. And so they did. 60 meters in, the cave shifted from limestone to shale. The air thinned. Headlamps flickered. Then, under a ledge marked with a faint chalk arrow, they found a hole no wider than a man's shoulders. One by one, the team slid through. What opened on the other side was unexpected. A dry cavern, shaped like a teardrop, large enough for two people to lie flat. The walls were etched with markings, some recent, some older. Scratches, tallies, names. A tin lunchbox sat in the corner. Inside, a notebook wrapped in wax paper, a pair of reading glasses, a Polaroid photo of Dana, taken sometime around 1990. The frame had been bent and unbent many times. And inside the notebook, a final message. "We made it out once, but only one of us stayed out. I tried to come back, but he was watching. Rowan never forgave me for leaving, but I told her I had to find you. She stayed behind. She kept me alive long enough to leave the trail. I don't know if she's still down here, but if she is, tell her I'm still walking." It was signed simply. Dana read the note twice before the words could settle. Then she looked up at the agent beside her and whispered, "She made it." Lacey made it out. The agent nodded solemnly. "Looks that way." But what haunted Dana wasn't the survival. It was the second part. Rowan stayed behind. On purpose. Not because she was forced to, but because she believed she had to protect her sister, even from freedom. The team widened the search again, focused not just on escape routes, but on hidden spaces within the cave system itself, crevices that could shelter someone for years. They found makeshift ladders, burned candles, even old cans of food wedged between rocks. Signs of long-term survival. But no person. Until one night, quietly, with no ceremony, the cabin received a call. Not from law enforcement. Not a traceable number. Just a voice. Faint, raspy, unfamiliar, but unmistakably real. "Tell my mother I waited, but I couldn't wait forever." Then the line went dead. And in the background, just before the static swallowed it whole, a single word whispered so softly it had to be slowed, and enhanced to hear. Lacey, the voice on the line, echoed long after the call ended. For agents, it was a dead end. No return number. No traceable carrier. Just a ghost in the static. But for Dana, it was everything. She knew it wasn't Lacey who had spoken. That voice didn't belong to the vibrant girl who used to dance in her socks on the kitchen tiles, who hummed when she read, who had once asked if clouds were alive. No, this voice had been hollowed, slowed by time and silence, worn down to something smaller. It was Rowan. She had stayed underground too long. The team triangulated the signal to a wide area near the base of Ridge Hollow, where the caves turned tight and unstable. The passageways there had been marked inaccessible during earlier sweeps, too narrow, too risky. But now, every inch was reconsidered. They sent in a subsurface audio probe. It picked up faint vibrations. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Not natural. Someone was down there. On the morning of November 9th, a team of 3 entered the hollow through a vertical shaft drilled weeks earlier for groundwater mapping. For the first time, they brought with them something new. A speaker. It played one sound. A looped clip from the old cassette, the one recovered near the cave's entrance. The twin girls' voices in harmony, just 6 seconds long. We're still here. We're still here. It was a long shot. But they hoped that if she was alive, if she could hear it, some part of her would still respond. 34 minutes after they began playback, a thump came through the seismic monitor. Then another. Then 3 slow knocks. The agents paused everything. They repeated the audio. Louder now. Sent pulses through the rock. The knocks came again, this time followed by a dragging sound. A shuffle. The cave was answering. They marked the spot and began drilling carefully, meter by meter. It took over a day. No breaks. No hesitation. The rock was fragile. Too much pressure, and the chamber beyond could collapse. By dawn the next morning, they broke through. What they found on the other side didn't match any recovery manual. It wasn't a body, or bones, or a child curled into herself. It was a woman. Alive. Thin. Filthy. Eyes squinting against the headlamps. But breathing. She didn't flinch when they reached for her. She didn't speak. She simply reached up and held out a photograph. Bent. Torn. Edges waterlogged. Dana's face, smiling from the 1990s, faded by time. And behind her, handwritten in marker, I knew you'd come back. They airlifted her out by basket. Rowan. 13 years after the day she disappeared, after every vigil, every false lead, every silent morning, she was alive. Malnourished. Weak. Quiet. But alive. Dana met her at the hospital. No cameras. No news crews. Just a hallway. Just a room. Just the sound of a door opening after more than a decade of silence. Rowan didn't cry when she saw her mother. She didn't speak. She simply stood, barefoot in a hospital gown, and pressed her forehead to Dana's chest. Like a child remembering something her body had carried, but her mind had locked away. And Dana whispered only one thing. You waited. I know. For weeks, Rowan remained largely silent. Psychologists believed she developed a condition close to selective mutism, likely a trauma response combined with years of isolation and psychological manipulation. They learned that Malcolm Reese had kept the girls for nearly 4 years before Lacey escaped. That escape, though never fully documented, was believed to be facilitated by Rowan herself, who had created the distraction that allowed her sister to run. In return, Rowan had stayed, hidden, watching, leaving behind the trail that would eventually guide the FBI. When asked why she never left after that, Rowan only scribbled a single sentence. Because she wouldn't have known where to come back to. Rowan was placed in protective care under FBI supervision. Dana visited daily. They sat in the sunroom, read aloud, played cassette tapes from the 90s, watched home videos in silence. But the question Dana never asked out loud hung between them. Where is Lacey now? Was she out there, still trying to get back? Or had she disappeared into another kind of silence, too deep for either of them to find? No one knew. But Rowan's eyes carried something, a flicker of belief Dana recognized. Not certainty, not grief, just a quiet knowing. She made it, Rowan said one day. She was the fast one. She always ran first. In early December, Rowan gave Dana a box. Inside were dozens of drawings, maps, diagrams of tunnels, dates, markings. But near the bottom was something different. A photo, aged, grainy, hard to make out. It showed a small roadside diner, blurred in the background, a payphone in the foreground, and next to it, a girl, smiling, holding a newspaper. Her face obscured by sunlight, but her silhouette unmistakable. Written on the back, October 2006. She called. She's okay. Don't stop. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the cave entrances by late December, blanketing the rock with a hush that felt like memory. Dana didn't return to the site, not because she was done searching, but because she knew now that the searching wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to Rowan. Recovery had come slowly, in pieces. Rowan was still quiet, still fragile, but her memory, long frayed at the edges, had begun to stitch itself back together. She started leaving notes, small, matter-of-fact lists taped to her wall. Lacey liked strawberry milk. He didn't come on Thursdays. The second tunnel wasn't safe. I drew the map backwards on purpose. Dana kept each note in a folder, not because they were evidence, but because they were pieces of her daughters that had somehow survived everything, the cave, the silence, the leaving, and because one of those notes, found taped inside the lunchbox Rowan had carried through the tunnels, said something else, something final. The bike was never for both of us, just for her. I walked behind. Investigators returned to the original site of the bicycle pole, the lake that had started everything. With Rowan's detailed maps, they identified a narrow ridge of rock just west of the submerged trail where the FBI had first discovered the girl's bike 13 years after their disappearance. Divers found something unexpected there, a steel pipe embedded deep into the lake bed, corroded, hidden under algae and sediment. Inside it, a bundle of items wrapped in wax cloth. Among them, a ring Dana had lost in 1989, engraved with the twins' initials. A folded page from Alice in Wonderland, Lacey's favorite book, and one last cassette. The tape was warped, the magnetic ribbon brittle, but forensic labs managed to recover fragments. What played was faint. At first, just static. Then, a laugh. And finally, Lacey's voice. "Rowan, stop it. Mom says I'm the brave one, but I think it's you. If you ever hear this, I made it out. I'm still walking." Click. The media never got that tape. The FBI never released it. Dana kept it with her in a small locked box on her bedside table. Not because it answered everything, but because it answered enough. In the spring of 2006, a woman matching Lacey's description was spotted briefly in northern Colorado. She used no name, paid in cash, disappeared again by morning. In 2008, a journal was anonymously mailed to a shelter in Utah. Inside were detailed entries about cave systems, survival strategies, and protective sibling codes, twin symbols scratched into rock walls. The sender signed only. Dana no longer searched the caves. Instead, she started a small foundation focused on helping families navigate long-term disappearances, those undefined years when hope doesn't die, but also doesn't speak. Rowan joined her quietly behind the scenes. She never spoke on camera, never gave interviews. But once, during a community seminar, she said something offhand, something Dana would carry with her for the rest of her life. Sometimes the missing don't want to be found. They want to know you'll still be there when they're ready to come home. In the summer of 2007, a package arrived at Dana's door. No return address, no markings. Inside, A photo of two girls walking down a trail. One taller, one smaller. Their backs to the camera. Pressed daisy. A key. Taped to the back of the photo was a single phrase, printed in block letters. Still here. Just not where you left us. Dana didn't cry. She simply placed the photo on her dresser beside the picture she'd kept there since 1992. The one of Rowan and Lacey in matching sundresses, blowing bubbles in the backyard. The old photo and the new one, side by side, years apart, but stitched together by survival. Some mysteries end with answers. Some end with grief, but others end quietly, with the return of a voice, a gesture in the dark, a trail left not to escape, but to bring someone else home.